Hey, welcome home to Cassidy. My name is Stephen Mitchell, and it is a great joy to be here with you, to be able to celebrate what God is doing and how God continues to move in and through us, God's church, to make a difference in the world. So whether you're joining us in person or you're joining us online, we are just excited to be able to be a part of a community that is serious about being more like Jesus. If you're new here, hey, you picked a great time to join with us because we recognize that we're not perfect, but we know the one who is, and that's Jesus. And throughout this month, we've been taking a look at what it is to really lean into the stories of Jesus, listen to those, and come to life in them. So if you are new here, like I said, you picked a great time, and hopefully you'll join with us to grow in relationship to one another, to grow in relationship to God, so that we can make a difference in God's world. That's what we've been called to. So on this Halloween weekend, it's Halloween weekend. We're excited to be here, excited to be finishing up our current worship series. We've been talking about the moral of the story, taking a deep look at some of Jesus' parables, the stories that Jesus told that illustrate kingdom living, illustrate what it is to be more and more in relationship with God and to be in relationship with God's creation, how we live and love and learn and grow in relationship to God and others. And so we took a look at the parable of the mustard seed, that God's kingdom is growing and advancing constantly. We looked at the parable of the lost sheep, that the Father is so in love with his people, the people that he has created, the sheep of his pasture, that he pursues even the one that goes off on his own. We talked about the parable of the bags of gold or the talents, that we want to invest in God's kingdom. And we talked last week about the parable of the Good Samaritan, that we need to live in the way of the Samaritan, but we also need to care for those that God brings to us like the innkeeper did. And so this week we're going to continue on that series. We're going to take a look at another of Jesus' parables, and it's called the parable of the sower. And it's all about gardening. The parable of the sower is about a farmer who spreads seed and what happens to the seed. And we're going to take a look at that, but it wasn't right away when I first became Christian that I understood many of Jesus's agricultural or farm-based parables. And here's why: because I had never been a part of being a gardener. I mean, when I was a kid, I did the child labor of, hey, I will give you 25 cents if you go and till the garden, right? My dad was very clever. Now, my dad loved gardening, and probably this is why I wasn't so enthusiastic about gardening, but he would give me a little bit of money, and I would have to go and till the garden. So with a pitchfork, dig up and flip over the ground. And in Texas, there's a lot of clay in the ground, and so it was not fun. I wasn't excited about it. But when my dad passed, one of the things that I thought of that made me really think about him was his love for gardening. And I thought to myself, hey, I think I'm going to make a garden because I want to remember my dad a little bit more. I want to do something that was a joy to him in my life so that I can be close to him. And so I decided when my mom was flying out one weekend, or 1 week, I said, hey, Mom, would you help me make a garden? And she was all about it because she was going to point and my son and I were going to do all the work. And so she shows up and we measure off the space and we figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And so we go and buy the lumber to make the box because you can't just put a garden in the ground that where water is retained. In this area in my yard had a low spot, and so you have to build it up so that the water drains well. See, learning things about gardening already. Welcome to Gardening 101 with Pastor Steve. It's great. And so we have this area that we've marked off. We're going to raise it, and so we build the box, and we cut the grass out. So digging up the grass, and I was remembering all of those times when I was a kid doing all this manual labor. And so I co-opted my kids to help with this. And so we're all out there digging the hole to make the garden. And it wasn't really a hole. We're just removing the grass because we don't want there to be anything else growing in the garden. So we cleaned the area up, we put the box down, and then we brought in fresh soil. This was new and heavily fertilized soil so that it was fertile ground for the things to grow in. And so we put that out there because just regular soil might not have enough nutrients. And so we're planning and figuring all of this out. And Mom and I and Savannah go to the store where the plants are sold, the nursery. And while we're at the nursery, Mom's picking out plants like it's her favorite day of all time. And so we get five tomato plants, 2 big tomato plants, and 3 of the smaller tomatoes, like the bigger than cherries, but smaller tomatoes. Because why? Because a single dad of 2 kids needs 5 tomato plants? No, but that's what we got. We got some seeds so that we could have some of the herbs that we liked in the house, some Italian spices and things like that, things that we could make into Italian seasoning. So my thought was, hey, everything that is needed except for meat or things like that is going to be in the garden for making an amazing pasta sauce. So we made space, we cleared the grass, we built the box, we got the soil, we got the seeds and the plants. And then, of course, if you're planting seeds, or if you plant plants into your first time gardening, it might be helpful to mark what those are so that you're not wondering if this is basil or if it's thyme or what it is. Now, those of you that have gardened for a long time or have herbs, you probably know what those look like. But for me, I wanted signs. So I had cute little signs. It was great. And so then we have the garden, and then I become aware of the fact that in order to have the garden, the planting is the easy part. That's not the hard part. The planting, the tilling of the soil, all of that was the easy part because now you have to almost every day be a part of that garden. Go and make sure that there's no weeds coming into the garden. Make sure that the water level is right. And so I had to buy a soaker hose so that I could have the right level of water in the garden. And then I would have to go and unhook the soaker hose when Alex was going to mow, my son was going to mow the grass, because I didn't want him to just run over the water hose that was connected to the soaker hose because he didn't care what was in front of the lawnmower. So there's all of this going on, and you're caring for and maintaining the fertile environment for the plants to grow so that they can bear fruit, so that they can have the fruit grow in, and so that there can be a harvest. And that, to me, was an amazing time because I had tomatoes coming out of my ears. I said I wanted to create a place where I could have everything I needed for pasta sauce. And man, we had pasta sauce for days. I roasted tomatoes. I found new ways to do things with tomatoes because I had so many tomatoes. And maybe we haven't all gardened. Maybe we haven't all had that experience. But like I said, Gardening 101 with Steve, probably not the best way to start this because there's a lot more to it than just doing it. But one of the things that I figured out through this is that, gardening is an effort. It's an experience. It's something that requires constant vigilance in order to make it successful. Now, you can have things grow and they can be wild, and you're like, okay, that was great. But if you want it to truly bear fruit in the way that a garden can, then you have to care for it. You have to be there. You have to keep things right. You have to keep the level of water, all of those things. And for us, today, it's easy for us to not have a good grasp of gardening because we go to Price Cutter or to Hy-Vee or to Walgreens or Walmart to pick up those things that we need, the veggies or fruits that we want. And we can have bananas even in the middle of winter because they're imported and those types of things. But at the time of Jesus, that wasn't the case. And everyone understood agriculture at the time of Jesus. And the reason that everybody understood agriculture is because they didn't have those stores to go to. They had maybe somebody in the neighborhood that was somebody in the village that was growing something, and you could trade them for something else, but everybody was aware and familiar with agriculture and the needs and requirements of agriculture because it was an agriculture-based society. There were things that went on that weren't agriculture-based, but the basis of life came from agriculture and from shepherding and crop growing and from cattle and those types of things. So when Jesus uses illustrations about parables like the parable of the sower, gardening, or sheep tending, things like that, it was something that was very common to those that were hearing the parables. Those that were understanding, those that were first-person witnesses to what Jesus was saying. And even for years to come, people understood what was required in order to have things grow. And so when Jesus tells the parable of the sower, when Jesus reveals this story to the people, it's one of those stories that they all got. And maybe we don't get all of it. Hopefully, with the quick rundown of my gardening experience, you have a little bit better picture. But we're going to take a look at what Jesus says, because Jesus is talking about what it is to live in the kingdom and how it looks to come into contact with the Word and hear the hope that is offered and what that has as an impact on us. So we're going to look at Matthew's gospel. Matthew was a tax collector. He was also known as Levi, was a tax collector. Jesus called him, and he got out of the tax booth and just started following Jesus. And so this is a first-person story. Matthew was there when this happened, and it comes from a story where Jesus has been in Peter's house along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and the crowds have come to hear Jesus. And it says this: that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Jesus comes outside of the house, Peter's house, where he's been staying, and the crowd is there, and so he goes and sits by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into the boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Now, here's an interesting fact about the Sea of Galilee that unless you go there, you really don't get, is that it is a natural amphitheater. It's in a bowl, and so the water is down lower than the shoreline, and the shoreline goes up. And so when Jesus gets in the boat, he's able to address everyone in the crowd, and they can hear him because it's a natural amphitheater. Then he told them many things in parables. I'm going to stop right there because I want us to understand that this parable that we're going to address is just one in a long line of parables that Jesus is telling from this story. So Jesus is going to say parable after parable after parable. We're going to look at one of those parables. And again, a parable is a story that Jesus tells that you have to move to catch the meaning. You have to move in order to understand what Jesus is saying and in order to embrace that and to live into it. It's a word puzzle. It's a challenge in order to understand it. And so Jesus says this parable. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But then when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil. where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Now, Jesus is telling this parable, and this is one of those parables that is awesome because Jesus also explains the parables. The disciples are sitting there and they hear Jesus tell the parable, and they come up to him afterwards and they're like, Lord, why do you talk to the people only in parables? Why do you just use parables? And Jesus said, the reason I use parables is because I want people that are wanting to understand, to spend the time to understand, that will move to understand the parable, that they'll get it. But those that don't, those that aren't interested, those that aren't really here for becoming more like their Father in heaven, entering into a deeper relationship, then they're just going to go away confused. And so he says that to him, and he says, hey, let me explain the parable that I just told. Let me explain this parable of the sower. Jesus says this, listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their hearts. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. Jesus breaks down the parable for them and explains it to them in a way that they can understand what was being talked about, so that they know the way to unpack the parable, so that they're able to teach us what Jesus said about the parable. And remember, a parable is a word puzzle, so when we look at it, we need to ask ourselves the question, what's the moral of the story? That's what we've been doing each and every week along this journey, this worship series. What is the moral of the story? What is it that Jesus is trying to tell us? What is the thing that we need to move to catch? And at first, it's just this story of what happens to the seed. I mean, that's really the ultimate story. The focus of the story is not on the sower. It's not on the farmer that's out spreading seed. It's not even on the seed itself. The focus of the parable is on what happens. What is the fate of the seed? And in order for us to really grasp this, we need to understand what is the goal. What's the goal of the seed? And the goal of the seed is to be fruitful, to bear fruit, to do what it was created to do. And this is key for us. I remember, and honestly, this can be something we struggle with. Because when we think about what it is to be fruitful, a lot of times one of the things that we do is we ask ourselves, well, have I ever had someone decide to follow Jesus because of something I said? And I remember when I was going through the Board of Ordained Ministry, which is part of the process to become an elder, ordained as an elder in the United Methodist Church, that's one of the questions that the Board of Ordained Ministry asks. Are you bearing fruit? How do you prove it? Show us where you're bearing fruit. And I was struggling with that same thing. I was struggling because I had never had a conversation to that point where I explained the truth of Jesus and somebody was like, oh my gosh, I get it. I want to be baptized and I will forever be a disciple of Jesus Christ. I had lots of conversations with people. I had nurtured and been in the process of helping grow people. I had engaged in love outside of the church, how to love people well and try to draw them nearer. But I was looking for one type of fruit, the only way that I could bear fruit in my head, the way that I really needed to bear fruit was to have somebody come to life in Jesus Christ. And what I found through conversations with pastors and friends is that they were saying, hey, you're bearing fruit in ways that you aren't even giving yourself credit for. The way that you care for folks outside the church, the way that you try to share the good news of Jesus, the way that you work with the youth and with the adults of the church to try and help them to grow in relationship, all of that is bearing fruit. You are seeing faithful followers of Jesus be created. And my guess is that in your life, that if you are a serious follower of Jesus, that you can look back and say, hey, there's some spots in my life where I see that I was bearing fruit. Hopefully, there's a lot of fruit, maybe 30, 60, or 100 times as much as just you have in mind, that you have been able to bear fruit, and it has been a bountiful harvest for God. And so this is the key for me was to say, okay, when we talk about bearing fruit, it's not just conversion, because that's not even our job. That's God's job. It's about living in the kingdom lifestyle. It's about loving people where they are. It's about sharing God's love and grace. And so when we talk about bearing fruit, that's what we're talking about. Now, I love the picture of the parable of the sower because first, when you hear about this farmer that goes out and he's just scattering seed everywhere. I've never seen that. And maybe that's how normally you scatter seed in a big field. You just go and throw it everywhere and it could land on anything. But it seems to me that this farmer, that this person who is scattering seed is scattering everywhere on purpose so that any opportunity for something to bear fruit takes place. And that's something that gives me hope because that means that Jesus sows even where it's not likely, but it might happen. And so we look at this parable and we see Jesus addressing the failures and the successes of the seed. What occurs in the seed? And we had 4 separate pictures of what happened. First was the hard and arid soil where the seed was scattered and the birds came down and ate the seed and took it. And Jesus says that's the evil one who comes, and before the seed can take root in your heart, before the gospel, before the hope of Jesus can take root in your heart, the birds come and fly off with it. And what Jesus is saying is, hey, this hard and arid soil is not the best place, but sometimes it's where you will first come in contact with it. And don't let that be a place where your heart is hardened and you are not able to receive and allow the Word of God to take root in your heart. The second one was the rocky ground where it grew up quickly. But then the sun scorched it and it died. And I don't know about you, I've seen in parking lots, in cracks in parking lots, you'll see, especially in the springtime, where a tree will start to grow up through the crack in the parking lot. And you're like, that's probably not a great place for you to grow. But it was fertile enough for it to take root. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying. It's not the ideal place for you to grow and be nourished in and continue to grow so that you could bear fruit. And so it doesn't. The sun comes out, scorches it, and it dies. And then we have the thorns, the things that the deceitfulness and the wickedness of this world, the deceitfulness of wealth that constrict and cause you to turn away because you're not willing to allow the word to bear fruit in your life so that you can bear fruit in the world. And then you have the fertile land, that soil which is rich and ripe and ready for the seed to help the seed grow and be nourished and nurtured so that it can bear fruit 30, 60, or 100 times as much fruit. And so here's the deal. In this scenario, in this word puzzle that Jesus is doing, it poses 2 questions for each and every one of us. 2 questions that help us to identify where we are and what we're doing. And the first, you may have guessed, how do you ensure that you are bearing fruit? How do you ensure that you are bearing fruit? And this is all about a relationship with God. entering into a deep and abiding relationship with God so that God can give you direction in your life, so that God can reveal the grace that He has shared and poured out with you so that you can share that with others, and so that God's presence is always with you, and so that you understand that. And that is when we ensure we're going to bear fruit, it's because we have drawn near to the one that nurtures us, the Father, and we grow in that relationship. But the second question, and I think maybe this is one that I am challenged with more than the first, is how are you making the soil more fertile? How are you building up others? How are you making the world a fertile place so that we can be a part of God's kingdom, so that we can love God and love our neighbor as ourselves, so that they can come into relationship, so that we can nourish, nurture, and help them to grow as well. So again, the seed, we want to bear fruit, but some of that fruit is also in making the soil more nutritious for those others around us so that they can grow up in the way that leads to eternal life as well, a relationship with Jesus. And so through the course of these 5 weeks, we've been looking at Jesus basically revealing to us an invitation to kingdom life. That if we move to catch it, we see that Jesus is inviting us to live in the kingdom right here and right now. We started with the parable of the mustard seed. God's kingdom is right here, right now, growing and becoming larger and larger, and we are invited to be a part of that because God's kingdom is going to continue to advance, whether we are a part of it or not, and we want to be a part of it. So that's the first part. Then we looked at the fact that God's kingdom requires that we are willing to go after the lost and broken, just the way that God goes after the lost and broken. And then we took a look at God's kingdom requiring that we invest our lives in God's ongoing mission of love and grace to the world so that we can share the hope that Jesus revealed to each and every one of us. And then we talked about, we have taken a look at God's kingdom requiring that we care for others and show them love and grace. And sometimes that care is because Jesus has brought them into our community and we can care for them as they are, not expecting them to meet our minimum expectation to be more like Jesus, but instead as they are so that together we can grow in relation. And finally, we're looking today at God's kingdom requiring that we are active in making our lives fruitful and our world fertile. These are the parables that we've looked at, and this is the invitation that God offers to us. The truth is, God's kingdom is come. And so the question is, what are you waiting for? Let's get to work. Pray with me. Holy One, we give you thanks and praise for Jesus Christ, for the hope that you have given to us, for the life that you reveal to us, and the love that you share in the world through us. Help us to be the people that you want us to be. Help us to lean into this relationship of love and grace. Help us to allow God to transform us from the inside out so that we can be your people, so that we can love well your world, so that we can share the good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ with all those that we encounter. Father, if there's someone that through the course of this journey has had their heart strangely warmed, that desires a deeper relationship with you, Father, I just pray that you would be present with them in this moment, that you would soften their heart, that you would reveal your presence to them in such a profound way that they turn to you. And if that is you, I just pray that you would pray with me. God, I need you. I need you in my life. I need your love and grace, and I want to be more like Jesus. Help me to know what that looks like. Help me to live into the hope that you have for me. Help me to be the person that you want me to be. Help me to put my past behind me and live for Jesus, investing everything I am in your kingdom. Father, we pray this together in the name of God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and everyone agreed and said, amen.